everyone, welcome to another episode of Motivating Monday. My name is Yekai, and today we are focusing on the verse Matthew 5:3. But before that, let me just share you a simple story. So just imagine there's someone who is seriously ill but refused to see a doctor. He is in pain, he has all the symptoms, persistent cough, weight loss, constant fatigue. But every time his loved one tells him to seek treatment, he will just say, I'm fine, I know my body, I don't need a doctor. The interesting part about this is that the tragedy isn't just that he is sick. The tragedy is that he doesn't think that he is sick. So now let's imagine a person with the same illnesses. He's in pain, he immediately goes to see the doctor, and he tells the doctor that I need your help. I cannot cure myself. So who do you think will receive the treatment? The first who admits that he needs help. So the greatest barrier of healing is not about sickness. It's believing that you don't need help at all. Spiritually, the same principle applies. I feel that the greatest barrier to receiving God's grace is not that we are sinners, but believing that we are righteous enough without Him. Now let me give you another example, but this time it's from the Bible. And I would like to think that all of us know this because we just had our Bible quiz last Sunday. This is about the parable of the tax collector and the Pharisee. And this actually contrasts Jesus' pains in Luke 18. So two men went to the temple to pray. One thought that he was spiritually healthy. Another knew that he was spiritually sick. The Pharisee came to God confident in his own goodness. The tax collector came knowing that he had nothing to offer except plead for mercy. One trusted himself, another trust in God's grace. In the end, it was Jesus that said that the tax collector was the one that went home justified. Why? It's because God can only fill us. We must first realize we are empty. Before God can forgive us, we must first realize and recognize our need for forgiveness. So now let's bring us to the very first beatitude, the foundation of Christian life. Matthew 5:3 says, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Luke 18 shows us that what poor in spirit looks like, and Matthew 5:3 tells us why the attitude is actually blessed. Poor in spirit equals to recognizing our spiritual poverty and depending completely in God's grace. When Jesus says, Blessed are the poor in spirit, he's not talking about financial poverty. The word poor describes someone who is completely destitute, someone who has nothing and must rely entirely on the generosity of another. Spiritually, Jesus is just trying to say that the blessed person is one who recognizes that I have nothing to offer to God, I can't earn my salvation, I cannot make myself righteous, I am desperately in need of God's mercy. Being poor in spirit is not thinking less about yourself, it's thinking rightly about yourself before the Holy God. It is recognizing that everything that we have, our forgiveness, our salvation, our righteousness, is a gift of grace. Notice that this is the first beatitude, that Jesus begins here because this is the doorway into God's kingdom. You cannot experience God's grace until you first realize that you need it. You cannot receive forgiveness until you acknowledge your sin. You cannot be filled until you know that you are empty. This is actually what Jesus says. For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom does not to those who think that they deserve it, but those who know that they don't. And the tax collector demonstrates exactly what that Jesus meant. From Luke 18:9-14 is actually a living illustration. Two men went to pray. The Pharisee trusted in his own righteousness, and the tax collector admitted his sin and pleaded for mercy. There are actually four main characteristics in this parable. Firstly, for the tax collector, he knew his condition. He did not pretend. He did not pretend to be righteousness. He openly admitted that he was a sinner. Secondly, he came humbly. He stood at a distance. He would not even lift up his eyes to heaven. His posture reflected his heart. Thirdly, he depended entirely on mercy. He did not mention about his good works. He made no comparisons at all. His prayer was simple: God, be merciful to me, a sinner. And finally, he received God's acceptance. And Jesus actually said, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. Why? Because justification is never earned. It is received by those who humbly depended on God's grace. The Pharisee had impressive religious credentials. The tax collector had only God's mercy, and God's mercy was more than enough. The challenge is that many of us are tempted to become the modern-day Pharisee. Instead of comparing ourselves with God, we like to compare ourselves with other people, and that creates competition and as well as vanity. We always think that I serve more, I know more scripture, I'm a Christian for many years, I'm not as bad as that person. But the moment that we begin measuring ourselves against others instead of God's holiness, pride quietly enters our heart. And the tax collector teaches us in a different way. Every day we should come before God saying that, God, I still need you. I still need your forgiveness. I am still dependent completely on your grace. Spiritual maturity is not reaching a point where we need God's less. It is growing in our awareness that we need God's more. Reflection. Am I trusting in my own achievements, or am I in God's grace? The doctor can only heal the patient who admits that he is sick. Likewise, God pour his grace into hearts that knew that they are spiritually needy. The Pharisee walked into the temple full of himself and left unchanged. The tax collector walked in empty and went home justified. And that is why Jesus began the Sermon on the Mount with these words: Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. May we never lose the humility of the tax collector. May we never outgrow our dependence on God's grace. For the kingdom of heaven belongs to those who know that they need the King. I've come towards the end of Motivating Monday. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope this short sharing will be applicable in our own reflection and in our life. Thank you.